Okay friends, imagine this. It's the middle of winter, you're in a giant stone castle and no one has invented central heating yet. The wind howls outside and the snow piles up against the thick stone walls. The only thing standing between you and the freezing cold is a roaring fire in the Great Hall. Yeah, life in a medieval castle during winter was tough. Forget your smartphones and heated cars, this was survival, medieval style. The castle might look majestic from the outside, but inside, it was a different story. The stone walls, while impressive, did little to keep out the cold. Think thick stone walls, cold drafts, and a constant fight against the weather. The windows were often just small slits, designed more for defense than for comfort, and they let in icy drafts that could chill you to the bone. But hey, at least you didn't have to worry about your Wi-Fi, right? Instead, you had to worry about keeping the fire going and making sure you had enough food to last through the winter. You might be thinking, castles are huge, they must have been kind of cozy. Well, not really. Imagine living in a giant stone refrigerator. Not exactly a winter wonderland. The Great Hall where everyone gathered was the warmest place in the castle thanks to the large fireplace. But even then, it was only warm if you were close to the fire. The rest of the castle was often freezing. Bedrooms were cold and drafty, and people slept under heavy blankets and furs to keep warm. The kitchens, where food was prepared, were also a source of warmth, but they were often located in separate buildings to reduce the risk of fire spreading to the main castle. The cold was harsh, and people back then had to be clever to make it to spring. They gathered firewood throughout the year, knowing that a good supply was essential for surviving the winter. They also preserved food, such as drying meat and storing grains, to ensure they had enough to eat when fresh food was scarce. It wasn't all bad though. They had big fires, warm, and probably itchy clothes, and enough mead to keep everyone happy. Mead, a fermented honey drink, was a staple in medieval times and helped to keep spirits high during the long, cold months. The clothes, made from wool and other natural materials, were designed to keep out the cold. Layers were key, and people often wore several layers of clothing to stay warm. The outer layers were usually made from thick, heavy wool, while the inner layers were made from softer materials like linen. And let's not forget the feasts. Winter was a time for celebration, and people would gather in the Great Hall to enjoy a hearty meal and some good company. The food was often simple but filling, with plenty of meat, bread, and vegetables. And of course there was always plenty of mead to go around. Plus they could tell their friends they survived a winter in a medieval castle. It was a badge of honor, a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. They would share stories of the harsh winter and how they managed to stay warm and well-fed. Try topping that story at your next holiday party. Imagine telling your friends and family about the time you braved the cold in a medieval castle, huddled by the fire with a mug of mead in hand. It's a story that would surely impress. Let's look at how these tough people made it through the coldest months. Hint, it involved a lot of firewood. They would spend the warmer months gathering and chopping wood, knowing that a good supply was essential for keeping the fires burning through the winter. It was hard work, but it was necessary for survival. So, the next time you find yourself complaining about the cold, just remember the people who lived in medieval castles. They didn't have the luxuries we have today, but they made it through with determination, ingenuity, and a little bit of mead. And who knows, maybe their stories will inspire you to appreciate the warmth and comfort of your own home a little bit more. Let's talk heat. In a medieval castle, the fireplace was your best friend. And we're not talking about those small gas fireplaces you see today. No way. These were huge roaring fires that could heat a small town, or at least try to. Keeping these fires going was a full-time job. We're talking tons of firewood. Cutting, carrying, stacking. It was a lot of work, and you couldn't just throw any old log on the fire. The wood had to be dry, split, and carefully placed to keep the fire going and the smoke out of your eyes, most of the time anyway. Even with a huge fire in the main hall, those stone walls still got cold. So what did people do? Insulation, tapestries, animal skins, even plain old straw, anything to keep the heat in and the cold out? Forget your skinny jeans and puffer jackets. In a medieval castle, warmth was the most important thing. Imagine living in a stone fortress with no central heating, where the cold wind would seep through every crack and crevice. The struggle to stay warm was real, and people had to get creative with their clothing choices. And the best material? You guessed it, wool. Wool was the medieval equivalent of today's high-tech thermal wear. It was durable, water-resistant, and most importantly, it provided excellent insulation. Sheep were a common sight in the medieval landscape, and their wool was a valuable resource. We're talking wool shirts, wool pants, wool socks, wool hats, wool mittens. They probably even had wool underwear. Let's not think about that too much. Wool was everywhere, and for good reason. It was the go-to fabric for anyone looking to stay warm during the harsh winter months. And if you were important, or friends with someone important, you might even get some fancy fur lining. Fur was a status symbol, indicating wealth and power. Nobles and royalty would often have their garments lined with fur from animals like foxes, rabbits, and even ermine. This not only added an extra layer of warmth but also showcased their high social standing. But it wasn't just about wearing as many clothes as possible. The key to staying warm was all about layering. Medieval people were masters of this technique, understanding that multiple layers of clothing could trap heat more effectively than a single thick garment. These people knew how to layer. Linen undergarments to keep you dry, wool overgarments to keep you warm, and maybe even a stylish cloak. Linen was lightweight and breathable, making it the perfect base layer. Wool, on the other hand, was thick and insulating, ideal for outer layers. And a cloak? Well, that was the medieval equivalent of a modern-day overcoat. It was all about trapping your body heat and staying warm. The more layers you had, the better insulated you were against the cold. This method of dressing was not only practical but also allowed for some degree of personal expression through the choice of fabrics and colors. And don't forget the accessories. Hats were important for keeping your head warm, and gloves were important for keeping your fingers from freezing. A good hat could make all the difference, as a significant amount of body heat is lost through the head. Gloves, often made of wool or leather, were essential for protecting the hands from the biting cold. And at night? Well, a thick nightcap and maybe a warm stone in your bed were like a warm cup of hot chocolate today. Nightcaps were commonly worn to keep the head warm while sleeping, and heated stones or bricks were placed in beds to provide warmth throughout the night. These simple yet effective methods helped people survive the long, cold medieval winters. Okay, let's talk food. Imagine living in a time where there were no supermarkets, no refrigerators, and no modern conveniences. That's right, we're diving into the culinary world of the medieval era. Back then, food wasn't just about sustenance. It was a matter of survival, creativity, and community. Fresh fruits and vegetables in the middle of winter? Not a chance. The harsh winters meant that medieval people had to rely on their ingenuity to make it through the cold months. The fields were barren, and the snow-covered landscape offered little in the way of fresh produce. Medieval people had to be creative to stay fed during the cold months. They spent the warmer seasons preparing for winter, preserving as much food as possible. This wasn't just a task, it was a communal effort that involved everyone in the village. From the youngest child to the oldest elder, everyone had a role to play. It was like a test of how well you could preserve food. The ability to store food for long periods was crucial. Pantries were stocked with preserved foods, and every household had its own methods and recipes for keeping food edible through the winter. Salting, smoking, drying, they did it all. These methods were essential for preserving meat and fish. Salting involved rubbing salt into the meat to draw out moisture, while smoking added flavor and helped to keep the meat from spoiling. Drying was another technique often used for fish, which could be hung up and left to dry in the air. Meat was preserved with salt or smoke, ensuring that it could last for months without refrigeration. This was especially important for protein sources, as hunting and livestock were not always reliable. Fish was dried and salted, a common practice in coastal and riverine communities. This not only preserved the fish, but also made it easier to transport and trade. And vegetables were pickled or stored in underground rooms. Root cellars were a staple in medieval homes, providing a cool, dark place to store root vegetables like carrots, turnips, and potatoes. Pickling was another method, using vinegar or brine to preserve vegetables and even some fruits. And don't forget about bread, the most important medieval food. Bread was a staple in the medieval diet, and every village had its own communal oven where families would take turns baking their loaves. The process of making bread was labor-intensive, involving grinding grains, kneading dough, and carefully baking it to perfection. They baked huge amounts of bread and stored it carefully to prevent mold and keep everyone happy. Bread was often made in large batches and stored in cool, dry places to ensure it lasted as long as possible. It was not just a food item but a symbol of sustenance and community. Of course, no medieval winter meal was complete without a big stew cooking over the fire. Stews were a versatile and hearty meal, perfect for using up whatever ingredients were available. They were cooked slowly over an open fire, allowing the flavors to meld together. These stews had whatever ingredients they could find: meat, vegetables, beans, grains, anything that could be thrown into the pot. The beauty of a stew was its flexibility. It could be adapted to whatever was on hand, making it an essential part of the medieval diet. And they were the perfect way to warm you up. Stews were not just about nourishment. They were about comfort and warmth, bringing families and communities together around the hearth. And to drink? Well, you could have ale, mead, or other fermented beverages. These drinks were not only popular but also safer to consume than water, which was often contaminated. Ale and mead were staples in the medieval diet, providing both hydration and a bit of cheer. Or if you were feeling fancy, maybe some spiced wine. Spiced wine was a treat, often reserved for special occasions and feasts. It was made by heating wine and adding spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, creating a warm and aromatic drink. Hey, when it's freezing outside, you deserve something warm to drink, right? Whether it was a simple ale or a luxurious spiced wine, these beverages were a way to bring warmth and comfort during the long, cold winter months. So next time you enjoy a hot meal or a warm drink, think about the medieval food hacks that made it all possible.